All right, it's Monday morning, and, well, the Monday mornings after a loss are never the most pleasant one. You talk about having a case of the Mondays, and certainly Pitt has that after the 24-20 loss to Clemson in Acrisure Stadium on Saturday. As you might suspect, as you might imagine, I've got a lot of thoughts on that game. I'm sure you do as well. And given what the message boards have been like in the last 48 hours or so since the game ended. I mean, depending on when you watch this video, I mean, it's been at least a day and a half since that game ended on Saturday afternoon, which, by the way, it was marvelous to have a noon game. Thank heavens for a noon game. Finally, here, was that the only noon game? Was West Virginia maybe a noon game as well? It felt like there weren't many noon games at home, at least. And so glad to have that. But, in the hours, the days since that game ended Saturday afternoon, there's been a lot of conversations on the message boards. We've been very active on the message boards. A lot of conversation about that game. A lot of people have a lot of thoughts relating to the offense, the defense, the penalties, and obviously some of the key sequences that ultimately sunk that game. You get the ball at the 3rd and 1, you get the ball on a 3rd and goal at the 1. You have you have the ball at the 2, you have the ball at the 1. You have to score a touchdown. You can't end up in 3rd and goal from the 16 and kick a field goal. That's in a game that you lose by 4. In a game that you're trailing by 4 and you're driving and you're in range for a field goal, if you had kicked a touchdown instead of scored a touchdown instead of kicking a field goal in that situation, you'd be tied at 24 and kicking a game-winning field goal with Ben Sauls instead of having to go to the end zone to try to win it. But I digress. Well, I don't digress. This is what we're going to talk about the whole time. Or not a decent amount of this show here this morning to get your day started. There are opportunities, and that's probably the worst part about Saturday's game. The most disappointing part about Saturday's game for Pitt is that there were opportunities there. The game was there to be won. I mean, yeah, they had the lead with 96 seconds left to go, and even less than that. They had the lead with 80 seconds left to go before Clemson rips off a 3-play, 75-yard drive, their second 3-play, 75-yard drive of the game. And the defense, which played very, very well throughout the game, just gave up some big plays at the worst possible moment. And, it be like that sometimes. And sometimes games turn on that kind of thing. I mean, Clemson was probably kicking themselves for having let Pitt drive down to take the lead late in that game, to go up 20-17, to break a 17-17 tie and go ahead 20-17. Clemson was probably thinking like, can't believe we gave up those plays to drive down there and score that field goal. At least we stopped them from a touchdown, but to drive down there and get that field goal. And, we could talk about that field goal drive as well. We talked about it quite a bit on the postgame show on Saturday night. I do think there was an intention to get the touchdown. On first down, they handed off when they got to the whatever they were at, 20. Where were they? Whatever. And they handed off on first down. It's 2nd and 9, 2nd and 9 from the 16 or something like that. And they take the 5-yard penalty. They take a false start penalty, and they end up on 2nd and 14 from the 21 or something like that. And I think the plan changed. This was what Pat Narduzzi said after the game, that he wanted a touchdown there. He didn't want to be conservative. He hates being conservative in that kind of situation. But when they ended up in 2nd and long, their plan had to change. And then they did have to sort of settle for a field goal and lay up for it. And that ultimately, I mean, those two drives there where they get into the red zone and they come away with field goals both times, that's the difference in the game. That's the difference in a game where you lose by 4. Both teams had 4 scoring drives. The difference was Clemson had 3 touchdowns and a field goal. Pitt had 2 touchdowns and 2 field goals. It was a far more evenly matched game than I expected it to be. Probably a far more evenly matched game than Clemson expected it to be. Probably a far more evenly matched game than you expected it to be. But Pitt played Clemson very, very tough. And if they can play like that at Louisville on Saturday, they can win. I might even say they will win if they play like that at Louisville on Saturday in all phases. Offense, defense, and special teams, understanding that all 3 phases had their issues and shortcomings and mistakes. Ben Sauls misses a field goal, a ridiculously long field goal, but he misses a field goal. The defense gives up those 2 75-yard touchdown drives, 3-play drives. In the offense, obviously, stalled between the 40s, I think, on 6 of their drives, where they were really able to get one big play to get into that range between the Pitt 40 and the Clemson 40, but never able to get out of that range on those 6 drives. And then they have 3, scoring drives or 2 scoring drives where they needed touchdowns and they got field goals. That being said, even though all 3 phases had their mistakes and miscues and shortcomings, they played well enough on the whole that if they can play like that again, even on the road against Louisville, I think they got a really good chance to win. I really do. And we'll talk more about that game, the Pitt-Louisville game here coming up, throughout the week as we get closer to Saturday. But now we're going to look back at the Pitt-Clemson game a little bit, talk about some key points, just sort of highlight some things we talked about after the game on Saturday and some thoughts we have coming into the new week. Plus, there was a basketball game on Friday night, a pretty impressive one that seemed to start the weekend off on the right note as Pitt crushed West Virginia, just absolutely blew them out, controlled the game from the start, led by 30 throughout most of the second half, and just pretty much owned it. They were cooking, as the kids might say. And now they'll get VMI tonight in the first game of this Greenbrier tournament thing. Lot to like about the basketball Panthers coming out of Friday night's game. So we'll talk a little football. We'll talk a little basketball to get your week started here on the Morning Pitt on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Yeah, it's funny to come out of that game, a very disappointing game on Saturday, and sort of feel a little encouraged about things. But I said this on the postgame show on Saturday night, I kind of did. And I don't think I'm alone in this regard. I think a number of Pitt fans have sort of expressed the same thing, that there were some positives to take out of that game, and not just in the, let's see if we can find anything. I think there were a lot of things to like in how Pitt played against Clemson, a lot of areas where they looked pretty good. And remember, you can look pretty good. You can look great if you go over to homefieldapparel.com and get some home field gear, their Pitt gear, or any school they have. What do I have? I have Evansville. I have my Evansville shirt on under my sweatshirt. They got the Aces. See it? Sweet logo. Can't really see it all that well, but it's too cold to just wear a t-shirt. So I'm going to have to wear my UIC sweatshirt for tomorrow, the next time we do a home field read. But listen, homefieldapparel.com has some of the best Pitt gear and college sports gear that you're going to find anywhere. Their t-shirts, their sweatshirts, jackets, hats, koozies, whatever you need. They've got great stuff. Their logos are awesome. I always say there's 2 things that Home Field does well. They look great and they feel great. And you can get it at a discount with the promo code PIT24. Go to homefieldapparel.com, use the promo code PIT24, and you'll get 15% off your order. homefieldapparel.com. That dude right there, Nate Yarnell, 350 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. Didn't play great the entire time against Clemson. Didn't have a perfect game for 60 minutes. Played well enough as the game went on, particularly in the second half, that he played well enough to win. He couldn't cash in enough drives for touchdowns. That was the major issue. He had a few more passes deflected than you would like to see. Missed a couple throws he should have had, but also had a few drops on throws that should have been completed. A touchdown pass to Raphael Williams, not an easy catch, but a catch that if you're going to be a big-time D1 FBS receiver, you need to make that catch. But Nate Yarnell acquitted himself nicely in that game. And while we can talk about some of the other things that stood out from that game, look, one of the big conversation topics this week, and you know it, and we're going to talk to Pat Narduzzi about it today. We're going to talk about, I'm sure Pitt players and coaches about it this week, although I'm sure we're not going to talk to the quarterbacks or the offensive coordinator, so nobody that could really offer all that much insight. And then we'll probably ask Pat Narduzzi about it again on Thursday, and we'll keep talking about it all week, is the quarterback question. Eli Holstein not cleared to play in Saturday's game, went out and did warm-ups, and then that was it. And I think that was just part of his protocol, continuing process to return. We'll see if he's able to practice this week. We'll see if he's cleared this week. Pat Narduzzi was very forthcoming on Thursday when he said that Holstein had not yet been cleared, so he would be a game-time decision on Saturday for the Clemson game. We'll see what his status is by that point this week, heading into the Louisville game. It would be easiest for everybody, I assume, if Holstein was just not available again, if Holstein was not cleared. That would make it very easy. Pat Narduzzi and his staff would not have to make that difficult of a decision. But if Holstein is cleared and is available to play, now there's a decision to make. And on one hand, I think you could probably make it easy for yourself and just say, nope. Eli was the starter. He got hurt. He had to miss a game, so Nate filled in. When Eli's healthy again, he goes back in because he's the starter. End of story. You can make it easy on yourself that way. I don't know if that's what they're going to do, though, because I think you could start thinking about it a little bit. Because the reality is on Saturday, there were a whole bunch of stretches where we saw this offense operate in a way that it really hasn't since the North Carolina game. And there's a variety of reasons to go into it of what happened in the Cal, Syracuse, SMU, and Virginia games, but that's a 4-game sample where the offense just wasn't clicking. It wasn't clicking and it wasn't hitting the way it did in the first 5 games of the season. And there were some moments in that game on Saturday where Yarnell would make a play and the receiver would make a catch, and I would say that is what they were doing for the first 5 games. That right there. Kanate Mumfield in the zone, catching passes to pick up 20 yards. They were doing that on the regular in the first 5 games. And it fell off in the next 4. And really good pass to Kenny Johnson where he makes a tough catch for 27 yards, utilizing Poppy Williams, getting Gavin Bartholomew involved. I mean, these were some of the things they were doing. Maybe not so much Bartholomew in the first 5 games of the season. He's really sort of come up in the last 2 games. He has 2 touchdown catches, his only 2 touchdown catches on the season. I think they both came from Yarnell. But a lot of the things they were doing, a lot of the ways they were able to move the ball, the passes they were completing, Desmond Reed getting swing passes and screens and short passes, turning it into big gains. I mean, that's what they did at Cincinnati. That's what they did against West Virginia. That's what he did in the first 5 games of the season, but it wasn't clicking. It wasn't happening in the Cal, Syracuse, SMU, and Virginia games. And again, I think there's a variety of reasons why. Cal was a really good defense. One of the best defenses Pitt has faced this season. Syracuse, it was a weird game. They only ran 44 plays or something like that because of all the pick sixes. SMU, they were playing from behind the whole time, I guess, if you want to chalk it up to that. I don't know. By that point, I think you started seeing some cracks in the facade. And Virginia, Holstein just didn't play well. And so you could look at it and say, well, Eli was really good for the first 5 games. Not so good for the next 4. In this most recent game, Nate Yarnell played pretty well. Maybe you stick with Yarnell now. Not necessarily as a statement of what you believe the future is, because the future is still Eli Holstein, but maybe you stick with Nate Yarnell now because, well, he did a decent job. And maybe if he gets another week of practice as the first team quarterback under his belt, he goes out there and makes a second start of the season. It'd be his 5th start overall. Maybe he builds on it. And maybe some of those field goal drives do result in touchdowns. Maybe. I don't know if there's a guarantee that happens, but I could see the Pitt coaches taking that approach and feeling like, you know what, Eli's still the future. Eli's our guy. Eli's the guy who's going to lead this team to great success over the next 2 years or however long. But for right now, Nate might give us a better chance to win. I don't think it would be crazy if the coaches said that. And I think they could convince all parties involved that it really is just about getting more wins this year, winning 2 more games in the regular season with a chance to win a 10th game in the bowl game, or a chance to get a 10th win in the bowl game. And, for whatever we might talk about, and whatever we might talk about with this team's upside and downside and issues and good things, bad things, and whatever, 9 wins in the regular season is still very much on the table. Louisville is not an unbeatable team. What are they, 6-4 right now? They just lost at Stanford. They look good at times. They beat Clemson. But they're not unbeatable. I felt worse about the matchup with Clemson than I feel about this matchup with Louisville going in. Jeff Brom is really good, and I think he has done a good job against Pat Narduzzi in the past, but he also lost to Pat Narduzzi last year when Louisville was much better and Pitt was much worse. I think these 2 teams should be more evenly matched than they were a year ago when Pitt was able to pull that upset. So, that's not an unwinnable game at all. And Boston College in the finale is absolutely not an unwinnable game. And I kept coming back to that on Saturday night on the postgame show that, if you took anything out of that game against Clemson, it should be like, yes, look, this team can still play well. All right. Because after Cal and Syracuse and SMU and Virginia, particularly on offense, but even a little bit on defense, it really felt like whatever they were doing in the first 5 games, all that success they had really sort of petered out. And you really started to wonder, like, maybe they weren't that good. And I think, like, there were people who were always waiting for that other shoe to drop, and it finally did. But you started to wonder, like, well, maybe it was unsustainable, or maybe the ball just bounced their way in a few of those games, or whatever it may be. But I think they showed on Saturday that they can still do those things. Like I talked about the things on offense that were working well. They were able to do those things, which they had done earlier in the season. Defense, they were able to play at a high level against a good offense, a talented offense with a good quarterback and a good running back and good receivers. And a pretty good offensive line, although their offensive line is banged up as well at Clemson. And so they showed you, like, no, the kernels of a good team, those little bits of what they'd shown you in the first 5 games and better part of the first 7 games about how good they really are, they were real and they were tangible, and they showed that they're capable of it again. And I think that was huge because it sort of reassured all of us, or it should reassure all of us, and maybe even reassured some guys on the team that, look, we're not dead yet. Like I think for the players and coaches, they had to come out of that game thinking, like, damn, we missed one, but we're not dead yet. We can still go out there and play some ball. Because that's what they did. That's what they did against one of the better teams in the conference. Probably one of the 3 best teams in the conference, I would say. They went out there and played some ball. And they had them. They let them off the hook, but they had them. And so, like, I think that's encouraging going forward. It's encouraging for what this team can do in the final 2 games, and it's encouraging for where they might be able to finish up here with these 2 road trips, Louisville and Boston College. All right. Real quick on basketball, I did want to get into it. I thought we'd have more time. I thought we'd split it more like 10 minutes and 10 minutes, but not quite working out that way. I had a lot to say about football, and believe me, we'll get more into the Yarnell Holstein talk all week long. This is going to be one of the dominant topics, I'm sure. Unless Pat Narduzzi, cuts our legs off on it today and either says Holstein will play and he's the starter, or Holstein's not going to play at all this week. Yarnell is going to be the guy again. But on the basketball front, I mean, just absolute domination by Pitt basketball against West Virginia on Friday night. Never saw that coming. I didn't see the Clemson game coming in terms of how close it was, and I didn't see the Pitt-West Virginia game coming in terms of how much of a blowout it was. And there were a lot of observations from that game. I don't want to belabor the point too much, but I mean, there were a number of things. Number one was defense. I mean, they defended their tails off against West Virginia. West Virginia had a couple of guys, DeVries and Small, came in and averaged combined, I don't know what it was, 40 points per game or something like that, and they held them well below. I think Small still ended up in double digits. DeVries had like 6 points. Those guys shot like sub 30%. They smothered them. Damian Dunn defended like crazy. Ishmael Leggett defended like crazy. Those 2 guys drew the majority of the assignments on DeVries and Small, and just controlled them. And we had a little bit of a discussion on the message boards about whether this year's team is better defensively than last year's team. Last year's team obviously had the rim production with Federico. But I think this year's team might be better on the perimeter. And that's not to say that Bub Carrington was bad as a defender on the perimeter. I think he was good, long and athletic, and quick, and got better as the season went on. But, I mean, Damian Dunn arrived as a finished product defensively. Like, he is a whole-grown man. And Ishmael Leggett right out there with him. One of those 2 guys is the best perimeter defender on this team. I'm not sure which one. Jeff Capel said after, I think, the Gardner-Webb game that they've put Ishmael Leggett on the other team's best guard every game. So it sort of implied that he was their best defender. But Dunn is playing at a really, really high level. And those guys are just relentless energy. And that's so much what it comes down to. I mean, you've got to be able to communicate. You've got to have instincts. You got a good scout and all that kind of thing. But you need energy. I tell my 5th grade basketball team all the time, defense is energy. It's being willing to outwork the other guy. It's being willing to run hard enough that every time he goes somewhere and stops and turns around, you are still there. And you can't get away from him. And Damian Dunn, and mark my words on this, Damian Dunn will draw multiple illegal screen fouls this season. I promise you. He might get called for a flop too, because he really exaggerates it when he runs through a screen. There haven't been many screens that have actually slowed him down, but he is very demonstrative when he runs through a screen. We'll see what if VMI tries to screen him tonight. When he runs through those screens, you just watch him. Whoa! But he keeps running though. He doesn't stop running to really try and buy the foul. He keeps running, but he'll get a few of those. But Leggett and Dunn, they just never lose it. And then you add in Zach Austin as a defender on the perimeter. They're good. They are really good defensively, or they were really good defensively on Friday night. And that's something I think is going to be a ebbs and flows kind of thing. They'll have good nights and bad nights, but I think after Murray State really challenged them with the guards and how the guards attacked, and I think Dunn and Leggett in particular, and Austin for that matter, have really bounced back and asserted themselves as top shelf defenders. You'd still like to have that rim production that Federico offered. I don't think Guillermo Diaz-Graham, he's got the length to do it, but it hasn't really manifested, although he had maybe one of his best games as a Pitt player on Friday night against West Virginia. Cam Corrin, not much in the way of rim protection, but I think still a decent player. But in terms of guarding the perimeter, this team's really good. And those guys, Leggett, Dunn, and Austin, are doing a heck of a job. Otherwise, Damian Dunn, his first 20-point game in a Pitt uniform came against West Virginia. Ishmael Leggett continues to play, although Leggett finally missed the layup for the first time in the West Virginia game. That was his first missed layup all season. He made 15 in a row prior to missing that one, which is a pretty ridiculous stat. Jalen Lowe, some more turnovers in this game, had 3 turnovers in the first half, none in the second half. He had 2 turnovers against Gardner-Webb. And my thing with Lowe right now, I'm not worried about the shooting. I think the shooting will come, but the turnovers are they're so uncharacteristic. They're not just in the numbers, but the type. It's just sloppy. He's just losing the ball in ways that he didn't really lose the ball last year. So I'm not sure what's going on there. I'm pretty sure he'll snap out of it. I'm not really worried about Jalen Lowe at all, but it is something to keep an eye on. Guillermo, like I said, played really, really well. Jeff Capel shortened his bench quite a bit for the early portion of this game. Really only went with 7 guys up until midway through the second half, which I think there are a few reasons for that. They weren't in foul trouble, so he didn't need to go deep into his bench. And also, this whole leave no doubt thing, man, they're taking it really seriously. I think Jeff Capel knows a game like that is one they absolutely had to have. They could not afford to lose that game. I think the lessons of last season and getting left out of the NCAA tournament and some of the reasons why they got left out of the NCAA tournament, a big part of it being like the Missouri game. I think they influenced Capel to some extent of like, I'm going with my guys. I'm sticking with my top 7. I'm not going down to Jorge or Amsal or any of those guys. It's the top 7 or bust, and really it's the top 5 plus 1. It's the top 5 and Zach Austin, the top 6. And we'll get Brandon Cummings a few minutes here or there. I think because he wanted to make sure Pitt controlled this game. And they did. They did. Really impressively. Shot lights out, virtually lights out, and just defended really, really well. And it was a fun night at the Peterson Event Center. Not as much fun at the Acrisure Stadium the next day, but it got close. It was almost there. And I think there's a lot to build on for that team, for Pitt football, heading into this Saturday's game at VMI. Or at Louisville. VMI's tonight for Pitt basketball at the Peterson Event Center. So we'll be there to check that out. We'll have lots of coverage from the game right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So make sure you like this video and subscribe. youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. And of course, a lot of coverage at Panther-Lair.com. Pittsburgh.rivals.com. Get all your Pitt sports news there and talk to other Pitt fans. Panther-Lair.com. Thanks so much for tuning in today. It's been a lot of fun. Hope you had a great weekend. Not the best result on Saturday at Acrisure Stadium, but you got what you wanted on Friday night. And if you're a Steeler fan, you had to like what you saw yesterday. Although, there again, a home team at Acrisure Stadium scoring field goals instead of touchdowns almost came back to bite them. They got away with it. Pitt didn't. But, guys, score touchdowns. Come on. Score touchdowns. All right, we got a lot to talk about this week. I'm looking forward to it. So make sure you like and subscribe and check in tomorrow morning for the Morning Pit right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.